Proud graduate of Mack E High School, if there are any alums in the house. So I'm happy to be home and to share with you on today. So Denisha asked if I could give a talk on mental health, and particularly as it relates to healthcare professionals or physicians in particular. So we'll be talking about that as we're going to start out or do a little intro with talking about what is thinking, what is the mind. Siobhan mentioned to you that I have a new book that's called Brain, Mind, Soul, and Spirit, the interface between science and scripture. I'll talk a little bit about it at the end and invite you, well, you'll still be here or the conference will just be ending, but I have a book signing and discussion for it later on this afternoon at 4 o'clock at Shreve Library, the North Shreveport branch. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay. So in this book, what I do is pair biblical scriptures with scientific knowledge, and that's science from psychology, biology, neuroscience, to look at what is the brain, what is our soul, what is our spirit, what is our mind, are they one and the same, are they different, and also to show congruence. As I've gone through my career, undergrad to grad school, postdoc, a faculty member at now 2 different universities. The majority of scientists I encounter, and as a professor of biology and genetics, I encounter you guys who are pre-meds and who've gone on to become medical doctors, such as Dr. Jasper, who was a student of mine at Xavier, who's been speaking with you earlier. You guys have, or many of you have, spiritual or religious beliefs. And if you're like me, oftentimes you might have heard that science is the opposite of religion. And how can you be a Christian and a scientist at the same time? Well, you can be both. And so that's what I'm educating people on, and hopefully the world on. And we'll have a little discussion about that, and we'll see the congruence between the two. So we began talking about mental health as it relates. And so I want to begin by asking questions, well, what is our brain, what is our mind? And begin by saying that many believe, and it's many often been said, that man is God's greatest creation. And in my book and in my theory, I venture on to say that the brain and mind of man are God's greatest creation. And you say, well, why would you think that is the case? And I say that because the brain is the interpreter of sensations. It's where movements are initiated. It's the seat of our consciousness, right? Our intelligence, our personalities, as well as our behaviors. Okay? And so we began asking questions, well, what is the brain itself? And as we go through our academic courses, and you're taking general bio, A&P, you're taking neuroscience, many of you, if you have not done so already, you may have to actually sketch a neuron, sketch a drawing of the neuron, inclusive of the nerve cell body, the dendrites, the axon terminals, right? You have to write out how to propagate the action potential along the axon. Others of you may have to sketch out the reflex arc, okay? From the sensory neurons, intermotor neurons. Others will look like, no, don't talk about that, okay? And so we know a lot about the actual physical brain and our nervous system. But what many of us do not know, who venture to ask the question, does anybody know where actual thoughts are located along that pathway? Okay? So we can look at, as we said, our reflex arc, and we can ask questions. Well, where in this reflex arc do thoughts occur? Are we looking at them as they are entering, or the junction between the motor neuron, or the sensory neurons and the interneurons? How about where the interneuron junctions with the motor neuron? Okay? Does it happen as the action potentials pass along the interneuron? We don't know. Perhaps others might hypothesize that thoughts take place as we send the stimuli from the spinal cord up to the brain, and one of the lobes of the brain is where our thoughts actually occur. But when we want to find the specific location of a thought, that we're not able to do. We're able to measure the gated action potential, we're able to measure the movement of the acetylcholine through the synapse, but we can't say here is where the thought it actually manifests. So when we began looking at our brain and our mind, we realized that we know a whole lot about the brain, and we can look at that in biology and neuroscience, and then we move over to our school of psychology and we start to ask those same questions. Where is the mind, and where does it reside? So we tend to think that our thoughts are the kind of non-physical parts of the brain. But yet and still, if we get into the school of psychology, that's not a given. There are some schools of thought in the area of monism that believe that the brain and mind are one and the same thing. And so we're like, what? What are we talking about? And as I began researching that, I was like, oh, I thought it was a given that we knew that the mind was non-physical and the brain was the physical. And so there is and their rationale for believing that the mind and brain are one and the same is they equate our brains to a computer, right? So the computer has hardware on the inside. The hardware is used to do processing, utilizing software, and you get output. And so they believe that the output is just a manifestation of the hardware processing. They go on to say, as proof, if you go inside of the computer and you cut the wires, you don't get processing anymore and there's no data. Okay? So they begin, in the school of monism, they believe that the brain and mind are one and the same. But there's also the opposite class, or the opposite school of thought, which would be dualism. And dualism is usually akin to the theist or spiritual belief that there's a separate mind and soul and brain for individuals. So under dualism, we say that the mind is non-physical and the brain is the physical part. And we start to say, well, how can you justify that, right? And so we began using the example of a log. It's gotten pretty cool out and pretty cold up here compared to New Orleans, and so you may even throw a log on the fire now, right? So when we put the log on the fire, we know that a log is a physical entity, right? Then we strike a match and we light the log. The log starts to burn. That's a chemical reaction. From that chemical reaction, you're getting a product or byproduct, heat. Heat is non-physical, right? Would we say that a log and heat are one and the same? No, we have one that's physical, one that's non-physical. The same with the neuron. So the neuron is a physical entity. Okay, so you can do surgery and you can cut the brain open and you can see the neurons, right? Well, the neuron has an electrochemical process, right? When it passes that action potential and propagates the impulse. From there, we're getting thoughts, a non-physical, from the chemical reaction. So just as the neuron is not a thought, the log and the heat are not one and the same. So we can justify that. And then we use the same example. Well, what if you damage the physical entity? So we wet the log or damp the log and then we try to light it. What happens? It doesn't burn as well. Or it may not burn at all, depending on how wet the log is. Therefore, we're getting a reduced amount of heat or no heat. So the non-physical is not being produced because the physical has been damaged. Same with the neuron. We damage the neuron, it affects or decreases the amount of the action potential, and therefore it decreases or retards our thoughts. So we can see that non-physical processes can be manifest from our physical. So despite the fact that you still have these two schools of thought, they still exist and they still debate on things because that's what we do in science, right? Everybody's right, everybody has a hypothesis. So we began to look at that. So we tend to move away from whether the mind, or debating whether mind and brain are the same, and if you're in the camp of dualism, which spirituality, Christianity would lie in that particular realm, we then just move forward and say, okay, despite the mysteries of whether they're one and the same, we do have a book of instructions and various books of instructions that tells us what should be the nature of our thoughts, right? Tells us what we should think about. And I remind you, some of those are, think on things that are true. Think on things that are honest. Think on things that are lovely. Think on things that are just. Think on things that are pure. And think on things of good report. So that may sound like a familiar scripture to some of you. So it tells us that what we should think about. And when we look at these things and think about these things, we call these healthy thoughts. Healthy thoughts collectively and consistently is good mental health. So we say you're healthy mentally. When we have the opposite of these thoughts, and we continue to have those collectively and consistently, we would then designate those as ill thoughts and say a person is mentally ill. So what drives this? Thoughts of the consistency in good thoughts or the consistency in bad thoughts. Where are these thoughts coming from? So we've established that we have a brain, and the brain is undergoing these electrochemical reactions and producing these thoughts that magically appear. Okay? So we can't figure out how is a stimulus from the light hits our retina, goes in, our brain processes, and we see an image. Okay, so where does that thinking, that magic occur? So we begin to say, well, despite our lack of knowledge in that, where do good thoughts come from, where do the ill thoughts come from? They manifest in the part of our brain that we refer to as the psyche. And the psyche would rest in that non-physical aspect of the brain. Okay? So our underlying mental health, and from this perspective, we're looking at you as a practitioner. So you're looking at individuals who are coming to you, and you're making assessments of behavior, of attitudes, of thoughts, and how do you navigate the exam, how do you navigate long-term treatment with that individual, what should be your plan, and what should be some red flags for you to look at. So underlying behaviors and our thoughts and figuring out where does that all come from, the renowned psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud came up with this idea that our psyche is divided into three parts: the id, the ego, and superego. These three have unique and very unique and different characteristics, but the three work cooperatively to produce our behavior, to control thoughts, suppress negative thoughts, and move forward on our positive thoughts. So let's take a look at each one of these in turn briefly. So what is the id? The id is the instinctive and primitive part of our personality. So we're born as infants with the id part of our personality, and the id is focused on self or selfish needs, instant gratification, and so it means that I want what I want and I want it now. One of the examples we often use when I'm giving the conversation is with a newborn baby. A newborn baby, when he's hungry or she's hungry, she'll cry and cry and cry until she's fed. If you don't feed her, she will cry louder and louder, okay, until food is provided for her. As soon as the food is provided, she stops crying. For you, you would be a clinician, and you may have a patient who's coming in feigning pain. My back hurts. I was in a car accident. I sustained whiplash. And I have to have oxycodone. I have to have a Percocet. And you offer, maybe I'll give you a Tylenol. Okay? Well, if you deny, I see some head shaking already, if you deny their immediate gratification and their desire, they become agitated, frustrated, and even angry. That's the part of the id, and like the baby crying. However, if you write out a prescription for that oxycodone, they are pleased as punch, and you're the best doctor there is, right? So when we receive those things that we desire instantaneously, it satisfies our id. Now, whether that thing is good for us or not, we're satisfied. When our desire is withheld, we become frustrated. Freud also named this the pleasure principle. And for those of you who are old school Janet Jackson fans, you might remember that song, Pleasure Principle, right? Okay, so this is about our immediate needs. In relation to that as adults, our pleasure principle or impulsive behaviors of the id also drives addictive behaviors, whether those addictions are to illicit drugs or alcohol, to gambling, to online shopping or sex. or any of those impulsive natures that we might have, that's all the id. Whenever those things are withheld, frustration and anger and even violence ensues. But when the person receives those things, they are pleased. The next part of our personality is the ego, and by age 3, we develop our ego. So the ego is our self-esteem, our ideal of self-worth, who we are, our importance, and thus it birthed the demonstrative phase. What an ego, when you think too highly of yourself, right? Okay. So our ego interacts with the external world unlike our id. And the ego's job is problem solving. So it tries to figure out, how can I solve the frustration issue of the id? So you have two parts of your personality trying to work together. I want what I want, but I have to be sensitive to laws, etiquette, and social norms in order to get what I desire. Okay? And so that's what our ego does for us. Ego is also with problem solving. That's why we in the sciences I can do trigonometry, I can do algebra, I can do calculus, I can do neuroscience, and we can do all these other things because we have the ability to problem solve, right? And so it places us in a position where we feel great about being able to do those things. Okay. I picked some of my medical characters and for physicians in the house. And we're like, don't put those people out there. Okay, the house, the resident, Nurse Jackie, these are some characters in the medical professions as far as Hollywood portrays them, with really big egos. And we would say, what an ego. So our identity is based upon our ego. So the ego, again, does not actually know right from wrong when it's doing problem solving. So its job is to just solve the problem. There are no moral issues, there are no boundaries, anything, all bets are off the table, I just have to get it done. Okay? For an example with the patient, suppose you turn the patient, or on your first visit when they actually received the oxycodone, when they really were in pain, they notice that in the left upper drawer is the pad for the prescriptions. The second time, when you tell them, I'll give you Tylenol, and they left frustrated, they didn't have the opportunity to get to that drawer because you were in the room. So they come back again with some other ailment. Oh, my toe is hurting, or my throat seems scratchy. I just want you to take a look at it. But while they're in the waiting room alone, after the nurse leaves out, right? They're sitting there waiting for you to come in. Hey, let's go into the left upper drawer and get some sheets off of that prescription pad. Problem solving, is it moral? Is it right or wrong? No, but they've satisfied their id. Right? So we look at that with the often shootings that we're having in our nation. And we began, oftentimes you'll hear people on the news who are being interviewed, and even in our own personal conversations at school, at work, and we'll say, how can someone do that? Well, part of the issue is these are individuals who are frustrated. They have a desire. They want people to see the world as they see it. They have anti-Christian beliefs, or they have a demographic of people they think are undesirable and they want to get rid of. And in attempts to talk to get rid of these people or tell them you need to go back to your country and they won't leave, they become frustrated and say, hey, I'll get rid of them. And they use violence. Sorry, this is flipping on me. They use violence in order to satisfy their ego. So they've gotten rid of the problem, but then we're left with the issue of, was it a moral issue or was it a moral solution to that particular problem? Mind you, again, the ego has no moral compass. It has no sense of right and wrong. So are we saying that these people should have a pass? That kill these individuals with these mass shootings, and we can see as far back as 1999 to present day, Thousand Oaks, California, we continue to have repeats of those acts. And we say, well, what drives that and what allows a person to do that? That leads us over to the third part of our personality that's supposed to actually govern those problem-solving tactics, our superego. So our superego is involved in our religious beliefs, our religious convictions, our moral code. It operates or infuses for us the golden rule to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. So it's a superego that would say, hey, we don't shoot people. That goes against the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which means that you don't cause harm to other individuals. The golden rule also tells us, or our religious convictions will say, you're not supposed to covet. So you're not supposed to covet someone's rank in the class. You're not supposed to be jealous either of their GPA. We're not supposed to be jealous or covetous of the relationship or mentorship between the faculty member or your research mentor and other students who are in the lab. We're not to covet one another's clothing or jewelry or houses or marital statuses. Okay. So those things are suppressed, and our religious convictions allow us to be able to adjust to those. The superego is also described as our ideal self. It's the way we see ourselves or we want to see ourselves. Sometimes when we look in the mirror, we see something different than what the rest of the world sees. Okay? Sometimes that's our ambition, is saying that one day I'm going to be that, but today maybe I'm not. Okay? There are other times where we think we're one thing, I'm a nice person, and everyone around you says, you have a nasty attitude. Right? So our ego is how we see ourselves. How do we see ourselves and how do we envision ourselves is based upon our admiration for other people. There are people that we hold in high esteem in our society, in our churches, in our communities, and we then pattern our behavior after that particular person. And when we achieve that sense of identity, it gives us a sense of accomplishment. Additionally, our superego, again, is shaped by our religious convictions, and that's through punishment and reward. When we do good things, we get gifts, we get praise, we get accolades. However, when we break the rules or commit a sin, then we have to atone for the sins. We go to confessional, we do different things, or you go to timeout if you're a kid, right? So when we break the rules, they are reinforced by punishment and reward, and that's how the superego knows how to impose a moral code in problem solving with the ego, and the ego and superego then work together morally to satisfy our id. So that's how our mental status is working. That's how we do the good thoughts, the healthy thoughts, and what we call wellness or mental wellness. When our behaviors and thoughts fail to meet our ideal self or our standard of who we think we are or who we think we should be, we feel guilty. When our behavior does not live up to the expectations of our parents, our friends, our mentors, ourselves, we feel guilty. But when our behavior and our attitudes and our actions and thoughts live up to those ideals, we feel proud of ourselves and we hold our heads up high. Along with the guilt, and going back to the example of the person who stole the person who wants the prescriptions for the meds, and then that person used problem solving and decided, hey, I'm going to take some of those prescriptions off the pad and I can go do my own thing. Well, the next time the person comes to the doctor, you've had a chance for your superego to impose your moral code on that particular individual. So at the moment you're doing it, you don't feel remorse, but it's later afterwards when you've had time to think about it, you may feel remorse and guilt. So the physician then asks, did you take some sheets off of my pad the last time you were here? And the person, oh, I'm so sorry, please don't call the police on me, right? Okay. Likewise, when we had the shooting in Florida, it was proposed by allegedly by the lawyer of the suspect that after the shooting, he went to McDonald's and he got some food, and then he went to his lawyer, and by that time he felt remorse and sorrow for what he'd done. Okay? But in the act, it was satisfaction without remorse. When we have time to think about what we've done, then we begin to feel the guilt because we realize we didn't live up to our moral and religious training and teachings. Okay? So that's what we began to look at as a physician to say, does the person have the ability to have remorse at some point when we're looking at mental illness or trying to designate that? Or were they just simply operating out of their id and ego? And then we began to move forward. Certainly these issues would relay over into the legal realm. And where does that interface for you? Where that interface for you as physicians, when the legal court or someone proposes that they are going to, they plea not guilty by reason of insanity or incompetence, a physician has to make that determination. Okay? So that's where you come in. So that person then is shuttled off to you, and you do some interviews with this individual, and you determine whether or not they are mentally competent to stand trial, or if they are incompetent, meaning they have mental or they're mentally ill. So the standard for that is if the individual can express remorse for what they've done, they understand what the act that they committed, and then if they can understand and recite back to you your legal rights, what we call the Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent, the right for a lawyer, right for a speedy trial, so forth. If they can understand those things, then they're designated as mentally competent to stand trial. So that's the designation that you, as a physician, would then make and then report that back to the courts. So there's interface between medicine and science, just as, of course, DNA analysis and all of those things. When it comes to mental health, there's a direct link as well between the medical field and our legal system. So we'll shift just a little bit now, and after now knowing that we have thoughts, we have good thoughts, we have bad thoughts, and our thoughts are controlled by this tripartite of our personality, the id, the ego, and superego. We also know that the psyche has powers. Okay? And many philosophers have said many statements, and one of those would be Gandhi. Man is but the product of his thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. There's a poet, Walter Wintle, and he has a poem called "The Man Who Thinks He Can," and it ends, the race doesn't always go to the stronger, faster man, but sooner or later the one who wins is the man who thinks he can. So what you think will happen for you will happen. If you think you're going to fail at something, you tend to fail. If you think you're going to be successful at something, then we work towards being successful. So what we think, we become. For us, this lies in the Christian faith and what we believe. We speak things that are not as though they were. Or we also have the ideals of positive thinking. And Norman Vincent Peale wrote a book called The Amazing Power of Positive Thinking. And I remember the summer before I started undergrad, my brother-in-law gave me that book, and it continues to shape the way I think and look at life today when I'm meeting new challenges. If you think positively, it's going to go well. Okay? And so there are two sides, and we often ask people, are these two sides of the same coin? And we look at the fact that when you have faith in a higher power than you, then it gives you some extra power and extra strength to do some things. Okay? So what powers does the mind have? The power of suggestion. And that's as simple as mom, when we fall and scrape our knee, or your stomach's hurting and your mom comes up and says, oh, it's going to feel better, okay? Or she gives you a kiss and you stop crying and I feel better now. But before that moment, you were just racking in pain, right? So the power of suggestion, mom said I'm okay, so I'm going to be okay. Okay? We still have that same power of suggestion with our mentors. Okay? You start a research project. There's no way I'm going to write this thesis, and your mentor says, you can do it. I believe you can do it, or I wouldn't have given you the project. And you was like, well, if he or she thinks I can do it, I guess I can do it. And in some years, you find yourself standing there defending the dissertation, right? Or walking across the stage, it's like, I knew I can. I knew I could. So the power of suggestion, our minds do succumb to the power of suggestion. Okay? The power of healing. So with faith, and studies have shown, there have been many studies of individuals who use faith and prayer before surgery, and have a speedy recovery. The treatment plan for individuals and survival rates for those individuals who've been diagnosed with what would be a terminal illness, such as cancer and others. Those who have support from families, they have prayer and believe in a higher power, they tend to have a higher survival rate and recovery rate as compared to those who do not have those same support systems. So there are many scientific studies that show that the power of prayer or faith in a higher power and also the support of friends and family and loved ones helps in the treatment plan and diagnosis and recovery of individuals. So again, the power of faith to heal. I was watching one of my new favorite shows now, New Amsterdam. I know college students, okay, you do get a chance to watch TV, right? So episode 1 was called The Ritual, and there was a family of, and I don't know their religion, I think it wasn't a voodoo necessarily, but it was a type of voodoo religion, and I think they were supposed to be Haitian or something. And they, one of the lady was in the hospital and she needed surgery. And they wanted to perform a ritual of protection over her where they had to cut her skin and put some spices in and it would protect her as she would go through surgery. Well, the physician was opposed. He would say, to do that means that you're questioning my talents and my skills, and no, we will have no part of that. And so the other physicians on staff were saying, why not? It has nothing to do with you. If the patient thinks it's going to help, let them do it, okay? And then you go in and do the surgery. So that's something that we have to be sensitive to, even though it may not be a faith or religion that you understand or ascribe to. If it helps someone else, their mind power, the power of their mind, may give them the healing that they need to be able to survive the actual procedure that you're going to perform as the healthcare professional. And also, according to scientific studies, we have the placebo effect. And many of you are familiar with that as well, particularly drug trials and treatments. People who are given a particular pill, whether it's a sugar pill, the placebo, and others with the actual meds, there are those who show similar outcomes as those who actually had the meds, but they were actually taking the placebo. And this is the ability of the mind. I'm taking this Tylenol because my head is hurting, so it's going to stop hurting in the next 30 minutes. Well, was it really the Tylenol, or did you will the headache away? Or did you just stop thinking about the headache? Okay? So we, by taking a pill or taking something, we can have the placebo effect, and therefore we oftentimes will have blind studies and to try to avoid the placebo effect. So it is a scientific study that's shown that we do have the power of the mind to heal ourselves. Two other theories in the area of psychology and also music. We know that music changes moods, right? You don't feel well, so you just crank on your favorite song and there you go. Or you just broke up and you want to feel even worse, so you put a sad love song on, right? So music has the ability to change our thoughts and control our thoughts and give us power of suggestion as well. And